Hamid Sinno joins me here in Studio Q. Welcome.
Thanks. How's it going?
I'm doing very well. The tour has kicked off. How's it been so far?
It's been all right. So far we played New York and Boston. We had a couple of complications with getting visas on time because Arabs. But no, honestly, so we had to play those 2 gigs without a violinist. But things should get back on track today. He's here in Toronto at this point. He's going to be with us for the rest of the tour.
Lee's Palace today.
Yeah, Lee's Palace tonight.
The BBC says your band tears up Arab pop conventions. Do you think that's fair to say?
I think the band. It isn't really like an intention for us to just arbitrarily change things, right? It's just the way the industry works in the Middle East has been very difficult for us to imagine operating within. So maybe inadvertently we do that, but it's essentially just us trying to do our own thing, right?
Yeah.
The way it works in the Middle East at this point is that the pop industry has this like hold over everything that's produced, everything that's consumed in mainstream pop media, like radios and music, television, whatever it is. And it's just
like more so than here.
Much more so than here.
Okay.
And what that does is that, in the absence of government funding, in the absence of artist grants and stuff like that, the independent music scene is actually really small and really underdeveloped. And that big monolithic industry just caters to one very particular formula of like producing this big sort of beautiful pop star who gets in front of the band and everyone ignores the band. So the idea of even a band is a bit alien at this point.
So tell me about the scene that you came out of then, the kind of underground rock and pop scene in Lebanon.
So Lebanon, like a lot of places, has these interesting sort of pockets of just independent cultural production. And when we were sort of coming around and starting the band, there had been like a bit of a few years of just things being really quiet in the independent scene. There was a really booming scene in the 90s and the post-war, and with all these like Lebanese bands addressing post-war issues, addressing post-war sensibilities and morality and whatever. And then things sort of died out for a bit. And then when we started out, things were also starting to happen all over again.
That's 2008.
Yeah, sort of 2008, 2009. And that's where we come from, basically.
So who were your influences at that time when you got together for those first writing sessions in 2008?
All right, so when we first started writing, the thing that we thought was particular about all of us is that none of us used to listen to any music in Arabic. We all found it really difficult to find stuff that we could identify with on the radio or on like music television or anything like that. Because again, like I was saying earlier, everything is extremely formulaic and a lot of places quite conservative and quite traditional. So we were, I was listening to a lot of like Seattle grunge, which is so typical, I guess, for like a freshman. Haig was listening to a lot of like different influences. Firas was like a big rocker. We all just came from very different stuff, but none of us were listening to Arabic stuff, with the exception of one band from that post-war era called Soap Kills.
Okay.
And yeah, so I mean, we got together and the intention was basically just to like write in Arabic stuff that we felt we could identify with, which I think is a common sort of like thing that musicians complain about like when they first start, they want to fill a gap of sorts, right?
That's what's compelling you initially. So at this point, have you had interest from those larger labels that are pushing the formulaic thing, but because of how well you guys have been doing, have they been interested in you?
We had a couple of brushes with us with like Middle Eastern labels towards the beginning of the band's career, actually. And then recently we've been doing more stuff where like we work together, right? So you have all these TV shows that bring artists together, right? So like these people from the big labels run these shows, but they want to hire an indie band to try and look like they're a little cool or whatever, like try to get the hipsters to watch that shit. Sorry, I don't know if I can say that on the air. Anyway.
You get one.
I get one, great. So yeah, no, we've had a couple of experiences with them, but at this point we're talking to like labels abroad for distribution and stuff like that. We're not really focusing on Middle Eastern labels anymore.
Are you concerned at all about what that would look like? Is that why you're not so interested in those labels?
It's not so much about that as much as just like we, in the few instances when we actually spoke to them, that feeling of these people are trying to format us never went away. Like there was a lot of very conscious effort to change the way the band represents itself, to change the way the band makes music. Even the studio capacities are a little ridiculous. You walk in there, it's not like there's a big live room that the band can play in. There's a musician booth, like there's a singer booth. If you're lucky, they might bring a drum set in.
So it's difficult to do an organic recording.
Very much so.
Mashrou Leila is not afraid to tackle politics. I'm thinking about the song Al Hajez, for example. Can you tell me what that song is about?
So that song is about security checkpoints, which are ridiculous in Lebanon. There's a security checkpoint around every block because politicians decide to build these mansions right in the middle of residential areas, and they sort of just ruin everyone's lives with it. So after the events of 2005 and 2006, the security got even more intense than it was before because of all the political assassinations that were happening in Lebanon. And where I live is where the prime minister lives.
Okay.
So then whenever I'd want to go back home from college, I'd get frisked, I'd get my bag checked. I'd get worried about coming back home in the morning because, you never really know what's going to happen with these situations. The police system is quite corrupt in Lebanon. So that song is about that. And that bit that you were playing actually is from an old love song by a Tarab singer called Warda. And we used, her lyrics and put them into that other text about the security checkpoint to sort of make it like a sexual relationship with the security officer.
There's some swearing and strong language in that song. We had to pick that clip very deliberately. But you actually performed it in front of the former prime minister of Lebanon, Sar Hariri, a few years back again. Mm-hmm. What do you think about that now, being some years removed from that experience? How do you look back on that?
I think I did the right thing by just explaining that it was about his security checkpoints. I'm quite happy about it. I think it was also just sort of blown out of proportion by the media. The media sort of made it look like, he left the concert because he was angry or whatever it was, when really, when politicians attend cultural events in Lebanon, they stay there for a very short period of time because of security. Mm-hmm. So they'll show up for like 20 minutes, half an hour, and then they'll, leave.
How did you feel in that moment as a young man, doing this song?
To be completely honest, I think I was more sort of like pre-consumed by the situation altogether. It was the biggest concert the band had played at that point.
It was a big festival, right?
It was a big festival. I mean, we were, on the same stage that Patti Smith was playing on, and the Gorillaz and whatever. It was just like ridiculous for us at that point. So I mean, that was what was on my mind. That and like really bad wardrobe choice. But
why is it so important for you to tackle these important issues in your music?
Like I was saying earlier, it's just the stuff that we think about. I'm not. None of us were really trained as musicians. We kind of fell into it by accident. We were all trained as architects and designers. So we write music the only way we know how to, which is just, if it's on your mind, you write about it, right? Yeah. If you're feeling it, you play it, whatever. I wish I could be one of those people that can just get into the room and say, you know what, this is the brief for this client. I'm going to write a happy jingle right now. I can't do it. I wish I could.
You have to feel compelled by something in your life.
Yeah, I mean, if it's on my mind, I'm going to write about it. If it's not on my mind, I don't know how to, right? Which is probably a flaw, right? But it's just the way it is. And at that point, I think especially when you're 20, to some extent you assume falsely, right, that like it'll make your music better, right? That it's a better kind of music when it's engaged. We come from design schools that are more sort of left-wing oriented. They want you to be engaged with politics and society, so it just ultimately becomes what you're thinking about all the time. And then it feeds into your music, but...
Have there ever been consequences for you for taking a stand publicly with your music?
I mean, I know people have tried to ban a couple of our gigs, but I think a lot of the consequences are not things that are very clear to see like that, right? Like, if a festival decides they don't want to book you because of your stands with regards to certain issues, it's not like they're going to send you an email saying, hey, man, so we were considering your band, but we decided since you're gay, we're not going to hire you, right? Yeah. That's not the way it works. They're just not going to consider you. They're not going to tell you about it. Mm-hmm. And that's the tricky part of structural homophobia, is that it only becomes very clear when you look at the numbers across the board, right? What gay musicians are getting exposure in the Middle East? None.
It's systemic.
That has to say something, right?
It's
exactly.
Systemic
it's a systemic effort that you can't really make sense of on an individual level, but then when you compare the numbers, it's so blatantly obvious. But
another example of a song that can be seen as political is Shim El Yasmin. That song is a personal one for you about the end of a relationship. Have you ever worried about singing so publicly about life as a gay man in Lebanon?
I think I was a lot more worried about it at the beginning, to be honest. I can very vividly remember going on stage in certain cities in Lebanon, even not even outside of Lebanon, just in Lebanon, and more sort of less urbanized cities, and being genuinely worried about shit, what's gonna happen when people understand what the song is about? Is someone gonna like shoot me? Whatever. But I think, I think the band's experience with that so far is sort of testament to how, how not conservative the Middle East is about these things. The band is quite successful in the region, despite talking about these things. Perhaps even to some extent because of talking about these things, which says something, right? Which says something about what we all think the Middle East works like, Middle Easterners included, right? I mean, our media makes us believe that the Middle East is conservative too. It's not just Western media that does it. And yet, I get to tour in North America, and that has to be because the Middle East has been good to me.
Is that something that you got back right away when you took those first big steps of courage and playing in some of these places and not knowing what's going to happen? Is that the reaction that you got back right away?
I think in a lot of places it wasn't very clear through the music alone. I think press had a big role to play in sort of just making it very obvious that those were the band's politics. I don't think the music itself is very clear because the Middle East has a tradition of, men singing and addressing women in the masculine, because of this very, very, very old tradition where people think, like referring to a woman in a romantic setup is going to sort of, it's like going to blemish her sort of honor or whatever it is. I don't think it's like that anymore, but it's just, it's a canon.
So people weren't picking that up from the music? But
I don't think so.
But the press
there's one line in that song where we try to make it very obvious that it's about two men.
Okay.
But it doesn't just happen through gendered pronouns, right? It happens through emasculating someone, at which point it just turns into this weird gender versus sexuality thing. But anyway. But yeah, no, so did we get a reaction directly?
Yeah.
In some places, yeah. I think it was, part the music, part also just the way the band presented itself.
Have you come up against fundamentalist conservative reactions?
We, at the beginning we got, trolled a lot online. At some point we got, a couple of death threats when we were trying to play a gig in Cairo. But none of these things were things that we sort of took seriously, right? Because it's the internet and you never know. The more obvious conservatism that we've had to deal with has been in, people trying to cancel concerts, in certain places in Lebanon, which I think is quite interesting. I'm going to stop at this for a minute, actually.
Sure.
So the media always makes it look like homophobia in the Middle East is something that's a byproduct of Islam alone, when it's not. So we were supposed to play this concert in a city in Lebanon called Zout, which is a predominantly Christian demographic. And they were trying to cancel the concert because homosexuals shouldn't be allowed to set foot on Christian soil, which I think is such an interesting part of just like, where does this fit into the Western narrative of, homophobia being a strictly Islamic thing, and it's not. It's about broader conservatisms and broader fundamentalisms in the region.
Is that one of the biggest misconceptions I think that exists in the West?
Many.
Yeah,
I think it's one of many. I think Western media has been quite simplistic about the portrayal of Arabs, the portrayal of Arab culture, the portrayal of Middle Eastern culture in general, and definitely the portrayal of Islam.
You and your band obviously had faith that you would find an audience in the Middle East.
Well,
or not?
No, to be completely honest, we weren't. When we started out, we were just making music because we needed to make music for each other. We were all, like I was telling you earlier, in architecture school, and we had been separated from music for about a year because of how grueling the major was. And we started this workshop just to make music for ourselves and for our friends. It wasn't something that was supposed to be, touring in North America 8 years later.
At this point, as musicians, you're almost cultural ambassadors. Are you trying to deliver a different, more complex image of Lebanon to the rest of the world?
I mean, I think it's part of what we're trying to do. Essentially, we're just trying to make music. I'm not going to lie to you, right? I mean, I wake up in the morning, I'm not thinking save the Middle East. I'm thinking figure out a way to make music and get bread. But it's part of it. It's a big part of it, and I think it's a big part of the drive as well, is that it's inescapable to have to confront these things as, a Middle Easterner trying to make music in the world at this moment in time. You're just constantly confronted with all these stereotypes and oversimplifications of regional politics and regional culture and whatever it is, and you you always find yourself in a position where you have to explain things to almost justify your existence.
You
right?
can't help but be political in that sense.
You can't.
Yeah.
It's because it's forced onto you, right? That's a double burden of being an Arab musician in this day and time. Is that you have to constantly explain yourself in ways that I feel, European or North American musicians don't always have to do. You're not, no one goes up to most American artists and says, "Do you represent your culture?" Versus with Arab musicians, where it's almost like, "Wait, you don't, so why are we listening to you?" Right?
Interesting. Does that feel like a burden, or do you enjoy giving a more nuanced picture of where you're from, or does it feel like a burden?
It doesn't feel like a burden for me at this point because we're just doing our thing, right? Regardless, if it works, it works. If it doesn't, we'll keep trying. But it does feel like part of what makes things sort of interesting to sort of, like we've had brushes with reporters that actually ask us if we can buy CDs where we're from, which is so absurd. Like, it's ridiculous. Like, we don't ride on camels and live in tents and have 5 wives, right? It's not the way it works. So it makes it interesting. It also just makes it very difficult in some places not to become really cynical about the way the industry works.
You're touring North America now. What do you hope audiences here take from your shows?
I just want people to have fun, to be honest.
Yeah. Are you surprised so far? You have sold out shows in New York and Boston.
It's been good.
Yeah.
I think Toronto sold out as well. The gig in New York at the end of the month also sold out. I don't know. It's a bit of.
Is it what you expected, or?
No, it's not at all. When the band plays whenever the band plays in new countries, the first time the audience is always predominantly the Arab diaspora, right? And then the goal essentially is to keep coming back and have that demographic change, because that's how you sort of enter a new market, right? But we weren't expecting things to sell out this quickly here. There's a lot of concerts. It's like 7 or 8 concerts in a month, and they're all doing quite well. We were just talking about it in the cab here because our friend was giving us the numbers. I don't know. It's just
that's got to feel good,
overwhelming.
To know you're not coming across the ocean and playing for empty rooms. It takes a lot of pressure off, right?
It does.
Yeah. Well, congratulations, and thank you for being my guest today.
Thank you for having me.